The snow fell in thick curtains as Theresa Hastings stood at the altar in her white lace dress, watching the man she thought she loved walk away from her without a backward glance. And she felt the eyes of every guest in the small church burning into her skin like brands. The year was 1884, and Alamosa, Colorado had never seen such drama unfold in its humble wooden church. Theresa's hands trembled as she clutched the bouquet of winter roses her mother had painstakingly arranged that morning. The flowers had been shipped all the way from Denver at great expense. Now they felt like dead weight in her shaking fingers. "I cannot do this," Marcus Whitley had announced just moments before, his voice echoing through the sacred space. "I cannot marry a woman whose father has lost everything. The railroad investment was supposed to secure our future, Theresa. Your father gambled it all away, and I will not tie myself to a family of destitute fools." The words had struck her like physical blows. Yes, her father had made poor investments. Yes, the family fortune had evaporated almost overnight when the promised railroad extension never materialized. But she had believed Marcus loved her for more than her father's money. Apparently, she had been catastrophically wrong. Reverend Patterson stood frozen behind the altar, his Bible still open to the marriage ceremony. The 50 or so guests who had braved the December snowstorm to attend sat in stunned silence. Theresa's mother sobbed quietly in the front pew, her face buried in her hands. Her father sat rigid beside her, his weathered face stone-like, though Theresa could see the shame burning in his eyes. Theresa felt her legs begin to buckle. The humiliation was suffocating. She wanted to run, to disappear into the snowstorm outside and never be seen again. But her limbs would not obey her commands. She simply stood there, frozen in her wedding dress, the train pooling around her feet like spilled milk. Then she heard the sound of boots against the wooden floor. Heavy, determined steps coming from the back of the church. "I will take those vows instead." The voice was deep and steady, with a slight roughness to it that suggested a life lived outdoors. Theresa's head snapped up, her eyes searching through the blur of tears. A man was walking down the aisle toward her, his tall frame cutting an imposing figure against the backdrop of the church's simple interior. She recognized him immediately, though they had never formally spoken. Ethan Jamison was a cattle rancher who lived on the outskirts of Alamosa. He had arrived in town about 2 years prior, purchased a struggling ranch, and through sheer determination and hard work had turned it into one of the most prosperous spreads in the San Luis Valley. He was known as a fair man, honest in his dealings, and utterly reliable. He was also known for keeping to himself, rarely attending social functions or courting any of the eligible young women who had set their sights on him. Theresa guessed he was perhaps 26 or 27 years old, though his sun-weathered face made it difficult to tell precisely. He had dark brown hair that touched his collar, eyes the color of creek water in summer, and a strong jaw that was currently set with determination. He wore his Sunday best, a clean white shirt, a black vest, dark trousers, and a string tie. His boots were polished, though she could see traces of snow melting on them. "What did you say?" Theresa whispered, her voice barely audible. Ethan reached the altar and turned to face her fully. Up close, she could see the sincerity in his eyes. "I said I will take those vows instead, Miss Hastings, if you will have me." The church erupted in gasps and whispers. Reverend Patterson looked like he might faint. Theresa's mother had stopped crying and was staring with her mouth open. Her father had half risen from his seat, confusion written across his features. "You do not know me," Theresa managed to say, her mind reeling. "Why would you do this?" "I know enough," Ethan replied, his voice low enough that only she and the Reverend could hear. I know you are a good woman who does not deserve to be humiliated this way. I know your family has fallen on hard times through no fault of your own. I know I have been looking for a wife, but have never found a woman worth the trouble of courting." He paused, and something flickered in his eyes, something warm despite the winter cold seeping through the church walls. "I know I have admired you from afar for longer than is probably appropriate to admit." Theresa felt her breath catch. She had seen him in town, of course. Had noticed him at the general store, at the bank, occasionally at Sunday services, though he usually attended the earlier one. She had thought him handsome in a rugged way, had noticed the quiet strength he seemed to carry. But she had been engaged to Marcus, and proper young women did not entertain thoughts about other men. "This is madness," she whispered. "Perhaps," Ethan agreed, "but no matter than marrying a man who just proved he never loved you at all. At least with me, you will know exactly what you are getting. I have a good ranch, a solid house, and I can provide for you and your family. I will never abandon you, Miss Hastings. I will never walk away when times get hard. That much I can promise you." Theresa looked into his eyes and saw nothing but honest truth there. Her mind raced through her options. She could run from the church, leave Alamosa, try to start over somewhere else. But where would she go? She had no money of her own, no skills beyond those of running a household. Her family depended on her making a good match, and that possibility had just walked out the door with Marcus. Or she could marry this stranger who was offering her a lifeline, who was willing to tie his name to hers when everyone else would be gossiping about the Hastings family's downfall for months to come. "I do not love you," she said quietly, needing him to understand. "I know," Ethan replied, and she heard no judgment in his voice. "But perhaps in time you could learn to, and if not, at least you will have a home and security, at least you will have your dignity intact." That last word struck something deep within her. Dignity. Yes, that was what Marcus had stolen from her today, but here was a man offering to give it back. "Why?" she asked again, needing to understand. "Why would you do this for me?" Ethan was quiet for a moment, his gaze steady on hers. "Because I have been alone for a long time, Miss Hastings. Because I am tired of eating meals by myself and sleeping in an empty house. Because I am 27 years old, and it is time I built something more than just a successful ranch. Because I believe you are strong enough to survive this day, and any woman with that kind of strength is worth standing beside." He paused, then added in an even softer voice, "And because no woman should ever be made to feel like she is worth less than her father's bank account. You deserve better than that." Theresa felt tears spill down her cheeks, but they were different tears now. Not tears of humiliation, but something else. Something that felt like gratitude mixed with the faint stirring of hope. She turned to look at her parents. Her mother was watching her with wide, anxious eyes. Her father nodded slowly, a silent message passing between them. The decision was hers. Theresa turned back to Ethan Jamison and drew in a deep breath. "Very well," she said, her voice growing stronger. "If you truly mean what you say, then yes. I will marry you." A ripple of shocked whispers rolled through the church. Ethan's expression did not change much, but she saw relief flash across his face, followed by something that might have been pleasure. "You will not regret this," he said quietly. "I hope you will not regret it either," Theresa replied. Ethan turned to Reverend Patterson, who looked utterly bewildered. "Reverend, if you would be so kind as to continue with the ceremony." The elderly minister blinked several times, then looked between Ethan and Theresa. "This is highly irregular." "Yes, sir, it is," Ethan agreed. "But not illegal as far as I know. The church is decorated, the guests are assembled, and the bride is willing. All we are doing is exchanging one groom for another." Reverend Patterson's mouth worked soundlessly for a moment. Then Teresa's father stood up. "Reverend, please proceed. I give my blessing to this union." The minister looked at the Bible in his hands, then back at the unlikely couple before him. Finally, he nodded. "Very well, though I suspect this will be a story told in Alamosa for many years to come." "Let them talk," Ethan said, his eyes never leaving Teresa's face. "I have never much cared for gossip." And so, in that small wooden church with snow piling against the windows, Reverend Patterson began the marriage ceremony anew. Theresa barely heard the words. Her mind was spinning, trying to comprehend how her life had changed so drastically in the span of mere minutes. She had woken up this morning expecting to marry Marcus Whitley, the banker's son she had known since childhood. Now she was marrying a rancher she had never even spoken to before today. When it came time to exchange rings, Ethan reached into his vest pocket and pulled out a simple gold band. "It was my mother's," he explained quietly. "She passed 5 years ago. I have been carrying it with me, hoping I would find someone worthy of wearing it." Theresa looked at the ring, simple and unadorned, and found it infinitely more beautiful than the ostentatious diamond Marcus had given her. That ring was still in her pocket, where she had shoved it after he walked away. This ring spoke of family, of legacy, of a man who honored his mother's memory. "It is beautiful," she whispered. Ethan slid it onto her finger. It fit perfectly, as if it had been made for her hand. When Reverend Patterson asked if she had a ring for Ethan, she shook her head helplessly. But Ethan just smiled slightly. "We can address that another day." Finally, after what felt like both an eternity and mere seconds, Reverend Patterson spoke the words, "I now pronounce you man and wife. You may kiss your bride." Ethan looked at Theresa, a question in his eyes. She understood he was asking permission, giving her control over this one moment at least. She nodded slightly, and he leaned down, pressing his lips to hers in a brief, chaste kiss. His lips were warm despite the cold, and the kiss was gentle, almost reverent. It lasted only a heartbeat, but Theresa felt something shift inside her chest, some small crack in the ice that had formed around her heart. When they turned to face the congregation, the guests broke into uncertain applause. Some people were clearly scandalized, others looked moved, and a few appeared simply stunned by what they had witnessed. Theresa caught sight of Marcus's parents near the back, their faces red with fury and embarrassment. Her own mother was crying again, but this time with what looked like relief. Ethan offered Theresa his arm, and she took it, feeling the solid strength of him beneath the fabric of his shirt. Together, they walked down the aisle as husband and wife, strangers bound together by vows spoken in desperation, and offered in unexpected kindness. Outside, the snow had intensified. Thick flakes swirled around them as they stepped onto the church steps. Theresa shivered in her thin wedding dress, and immediately Ethan shrugged out of his coat and draped it around her shoulders. The gesture was automatic, protective, and it made something warm bloom in her chest. "I have my wagon here," Ethan said, gesturing to where a sturdy farm wagon waited, hitched to 2 strong horses. "We should get you out of this cold." Theresa's mother rushed out behind them, her father close behind. "Theresa, darling," her mother gasped, reaching for her hands. "Are you certain about this? It all happened so fast." "I am as certain as I can be under the circumstances, mother," Theresa replied. She turned to her father. "Papa, I am sorry. I know this is not what you planned." Her father's eyes were damp. "You have nothing to apologize for, daughter. If anything, I am the one who failed you. My poor choices brought this situation upon us all." "Sir," Ethan interjected respectfully, "your daughter did not marry me out of desperation, regardless of what people might say. I asked because I wanted to, and she accepted because she chose to. There is no shame in that. Thomas Hastings looked at the younger man with something like gratitude. "You are a good man, Ethan Jamison. I do not know what prompted you to do this, but I am grateful. Please, take care of my daughter." "I give you my word, sir," Ethan replied solemnly. Theresa's mother pulled her into a tight embrace. "Come visit me soon," she whispered. "I need to know you are all right." "I will, mother, I promise." The guests began filing out of the church, bundled against the cold. Some approached to offer congratulations. Others hurried to their carriages without a word. Theresa saw Marcus's parents depart quickly, their faces averted. There was no sign of Marcus himself. He had apparently fled entirely. Ethan helped Theresa into the wagon, then climbed up beside her. He took the reins in his capable hands and clicked his tongue at the horses. The wagon lurched forward, and they began the journey to his ranch, to her new home, to a life she had never imagined. The drive took nearly an hour through the heavily falling snow. The road leading out of Alamosa quickly gave way to open rangeland. The mountains of the Sangre de Cristo range visible in the distance, despite the weather. Ethan had spread several thick blankets in the wagon bed, and Theresa huddled under them, trying to process everything that had happened. "Are you warm enough?" Ethan asked, glancing over at her. "Yes, thank you," Theresa replied. Then, because the silence felt too heavy, she added, "Tell me about your ranch." Ethan seemed relieved to have something concrete to discuss. "I have about 500 acres of good grazing land. Right now, I am running about 200 head of cattle, mostly Herefords. I have 4 ranch hands who work for me. Miguel, who has been with me since the beginning, his son Carlos, and 2 brothers named Jack and Tom Henderson. They are good men, hard workers. There is also Mrs. Chen, who comes 3 times a week to help with the housework and cooking. She is a widow from the Chinese community that built the railroad through here." "And the house?" Theresa asked, trying to picture her new home. "It is a 2-story structure, wood frame, with 4 bedrooms upstairs and the main living areas downstairs. I built a proper kitchen with a good stove, a parlor and a dining room. There is a barn, a chicken coop and a smokehouse. A well with good water. It is not fancy, but it is solid and warm." Theresa nodded, absorbing this information. It sounded substantial, more than adequate. "Have you always wanted to be a rancher?" Ethan was quiet for a moment, his eyes on the snow-covered road ahead. "My father was a rancher in Wyoming Territory. I grew up learning the work. After my parents passed, I sold their land and came south, looking for a fresh start. I found it here in the San Luis Valley. The land called to me, I suppose." "Do you have siblings?" Theresa asked. "A sister, Elizabeth. She is married to a schoolteacher in Cheyenne. We write occasionally, but we are not particularly close." "I see," Theresa said softly. She fell silent again, watching the landscape roll by. The snow was beautiful in its way, painting everything white and clean, covering up the brown winter grass and the scattered rocks. It felt symbolic somehow, like the world was offering her a blank slate. Finally, the ranch came into view. The house was indeed substantial, a handsome structure with a covered porch wrapping around the front. Smoke curled from the chimney, suggesting someone had kept the fires going. The barn was large and well-maintained, and she could see several other outbuildings scattered around the property. Fences marked off various corrals and pastures, though many of the cattle had apparently been moved to shelter from the storm. Ethan guided the wagon to a stop near the front porch. Before Theresa could move, he had jumped down and come around to her side, offering his hands to help her down. She took them, feeling the warmth and strength of his grip through her gloves. Her feet touched the snowy ground, and she looked up at the house that was now her home. "Let me get you inside," Ethan said. Then, before she could protest, he scooped her up into his arms, blankets and all. Theresa gasped, instinctively wrapping her arms around his neck. "What are you doing, carrying my bride over the threshold?" Ethan replied, a hint of amusement in his voice. "It is tradition, is it not?" "Yes, but I thought," Theresa began, then stopped. What had she thought? That because this was not a conventional marriage, they would skip the traditions. Ethan carried her up the porch steps and pushed open the front door. The interior of the house was warm and welcoming. A fire crackled in the stone fireplace in the parlor. The furniture was simple but well made. A sofa, 2 chairs, a few tables, oil lamps that cast a golden glow. Ethan set her down gently on her feet. "Welcome home, Theresa," he said quietly. She looked around, taking it all in. The room was clean but had the unmistakable feel of a bachelor dwelling. There were no curtains on the windows, no decorative touches, no flowers or pictures on the walls. It was functional and comfortable, but it lacked the warmth a woman's touch could bring. "It is lovely," she said, and meant it. The house was solid and well built, exactly as he had described. "I imagine you will want to make changes," Ethan said, removing his hat and hanging it on a peg by the door. "Please feel free to do whatever you like. This is your home now, too." Theresa nodded, though she felt overwhelmed. Her home. Just hours ago, she had expected to move into Marcus's family's large house in town, with servants and fine furnishings. Now she was standing in a ranch house miles from town, married to a man she barely knew. The contrast was staggering. "Would you like something warm to drink?" Ethan asked. "I can make coffee, or there is tea if you prefer." "Tea would be wonderful, thank you," Theresa replied. Ethan led her through to the kitchen, which was indeed spacious and well equipped. He pumped water into a kettle and set it on the stove, adding wood to keep the heat strong. His movements were efficient and practiced. Clearly, he was accustomed to doing for himself. Theresa sat down at the kitchen table, suddenly exhausted. The emotional upheaval of the day was catching up with her. She felt wrung out, empty, as if all her tears and fears had hollowed her from the inside. Ethan glanced at her as he prepared the tea. "It has been a difficult day for you." "Yes," Theresa agreed, not trusting herself to say more. "I want you to know something," Ethan said, turning to face her directly. "I do not expect anything from you that you are not ready to give. This house has 4 bedrooms. You may have your own space, your own privacy. I meant what I said in the church. I will not force anything upon you." Theresa felt her cheeks grow warm as she understood his meaning. He was talking about the marriage bed, about the duties a wife was expected to perform. "That is very considerate of you." "It is only right," Ethan replied. "We are strangers, Theresa. I hope that will change in time, but I will not rush you." The kettle began to whistle, and Ethan poured hot water over the tea leaves in a simple ceramic pot. He brought it to the table along with 2 cups, a small pitcher of milk, and a bowl of sugar. They sat together in the quiet kitchen, drinking their tea, the only sound the crackling of the fire in the stove and the howling of the wind outside. "What happened to Marcus Whitley?" Ethan said finally. "That was not about you. You understand that, do not you?" Theresa looked up at him, surprised by the statement. "What do you mean?" "I mean that his decision to walk away says everything about his character and nothing about your worth," Ethan explained. "A real man does not abandon the woman he claims to love just because her financial situation changes. A real man stands by his commitments, especially when times get hard." Theresa felt a lump form in her throat. "I thought he loved me. We had been courting for over a year. I thought I knew him." "Sometimes people show us who they truly are only when they are tested," Ethan said gently. "Today, Marcus Whitley showed you exactly who he is. A coward and a fool." "You think he is a fool?" Theresa asked. "I think any man who would walk away from you is the biggest fool in Colorado territory," Ethan replied simply. Theresa felt tears prick at her eyes again. She blinked them back, determined not to cry any more today. Why did you really do this, Ethan? Please tell me the truth. Ethan was quiet for a long moment, his hands wrapped around his teacup. Finally, he spoke. I have seen you in town many times over the past 2 years. I watched you help Mrs. Patterson with the church flowers. I saw you reading to the Sanders children when their mother was ill with fever. I noticed how you always had a kind word for everyone, regardless of their station. I admired that. I admired you. He paused, then continued. When I heard you were engaged to Marcus Whitley, I told myself it was for the best. You deserved someone who could give you the kind of life you were accustomed to. But today, when I saw him walk away from you like that, something in me just snapped. I could not stand by and watch you be humiliated. And I realized that I had been fooling myself. I wanted you for myself. I have wanted you for a long time. Theresa stared at him, stunned by this confession. You wanted me? Yes, Ethan said simply. I know this is not how anyone dreams of starting a marriage. But I am hoping that, perhaps, given time, we can build something real together. Something that is not based on social expectations or financial arrangements, but on genuine respect and partnership. Maybe even affection, if I am very fortunate. Theresa did not know what to say. She felt overwhelmed by his honesty, by the raw vulnerability in his words. This man had married her knowing she did not love him, hoping only that she might learn to care for him someday. It was both heartbreaking and strangely beautiful. I will try, she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. I cannot promise to love you, Ethan, but I can promise to try. To be a good wife, to respect you, to build this partnership you speak of. Ethan's face softened into something that was almost a smile. That is all I can ask for. They finished their tea in a more comfortable silence. Then Ethan showed Theresa through the rest of the house. The parlor she had already seen. There was a small study with a desk and bookshelves, modestly filled with volumes on ranching, animal husbandry, and a few novels. The dining room had a large handmade table that could seat 8. Upstairs, the 4 bedrooms were all furnished with simple but sturdy beds, dressers, and washstands. This one has the best view, Ethan said, opening the door to the largest bedroom. It faced east with windows that would catch the sunrise. I thought you might like it. The room was spacious and clean, with a large bed covered in a quilt that looked handmade. There was a dresser, a wardrobe, a washstand with a pitcher and bowl, and a rocking chair by the window. It was simple, but it was more than adequate. Where do you sleep? Theresa asked. Ethan gestured to the room across the hall. There. So I am nearby if you need anything, but not so close as to make you uncomfortable. Theresa felt a rush of gratitude for his thoughtfulness. Thank you, Ethan. For everything. You do not need to thank me, he replied. We are married now. Your well-being is my responsibility and my privilege. There was a knock at the front door downstairs, and Ethan excused himself to answer it. Theresa heard male voices, then Ethan called up the stairs. Theresa, could you come down, please? She descended to find a middle-aged Mexican man standing in the entryway, hat in hand, a warm smile on his weathered face. Beside him was a younger man, clearly his son, with the same kind eyes. Theresa, this is Miguel Herrera and his son Carlos, Ethan introduced them. Miguel, Carlos, this is my wife, Theresa. Miguel's eyes widened slightly at the word wife, but he recovered quickly and bowed respectfully. Senora Jamison, it is an honor to meet you. We heard the news in town and came to offer our congratulations and to see if you needed anything. Thank you. That is very kind, Theresa said, grateful for the genuine warmth in his voice. The other men will want to meet you as well, Carlos added. Jack and Tom are seeing to the cattle. making sure they are all sheltered from the storm, but they send their best wishes. "The main thing," Miguel said, turning to Ethan, "is that we wanted you to know we will do whatever you need to help Senora Jamison settle in. My wife Rosa would be happy to come over and assist with anything." "I appreciate that, Miguel," Ethan said. "Perhaps in a few days, once Theresa has had time to adjust." After a few more minutes of conversation, Miguel and Carlos departed, leaving Ethan and Theresa alone again. The sun was setting, casting long shadows through the windows despite the early hour. Winter days were short. "Are you hungry?" Ethan asked. "I'm afraid I did not plan for a wedding supper." Theresa realized she had not eaten since breakfast, and even then she had barely managed a few bites, too nervous about the ceremony. "I am hungry, yes. Let me see what I can put together," Ethan said. In the kitchen, he managed to produce a surprisingly good meal of fried ham, eggs, biscuits left over from breakfast, and some canned peaches. They ate together at the kitchen table, and gradually Theresa felt some of her tension begin to ease. Ethan was easy to be around. He did not push for conversation, but when they did talk, he listened attentively and responded thoughtfully. After dinner, Theresa helped clean up despite Ethan's protests that she should rest. "I am not an invalid," she told him, "and I need to learn my way around this kitchen." "It is your kitchen now," Ethan reminded her. "You can arrange it however you like." By the time they finished, full darkness had fallen. The wind continued to howl outside and snow piled against the windows. But inside, the house was warm and secure. Theresa found herself yawning, exhausted by the emotional toll of the day. "You should rest," Ethan said gently. "It has been a long day." Theresa nodded. "Yes, I think I will, but Ethan, I do not have any of my things. My clothes are all at my parents' house." "I will go into town tomorrow and fetch them," Ethan promised. "For tonight, I have some extra shirts that you can use as a nightgown. They will be large, but they are clean." He went upstairs and returned with a soft flannel shirt, which he handed to her. "There is fresh water in the pitcher in your room and extra blankets in the wardrobe if you get cold. If you need anything at all during the night, just knock on my door." "Thank you, Ethan," Theresa said. She hesitated, then added, "For everything. For today, for this house, for your kindness." "I know I have said it before, but I truly mean it." Ethan's expression was gentle in the lamplight. "You are my wife now, Theresa. You do not need to thank me for treating you well. That is simply what you deserve." Theresa felt a strange flutter in her chest at his words. She was not sure what to make of this man she had married. He was nothing like Marcus, who had been charming and smooth but ultimately shallow. Ethan was direct and honest, perhaps a bit rough around the edges, but there was a core of genuine integrity to him that she found deeply appealing. She went upstairs to her new bedroom and changed into Ethan's shirt, which did indeed hang nearly to her knees. The fabric smelled faintly of soap and wood smoke. She washed her face and brushed out her hair, plaiting it into a loose braid. Then she climbed into the bed, which was comfortable and topped with warm quilts. As she lay in the darkness, listening to the storm outside and the unfamiliar creaks of the house, Theresa tried to process everything that had happened. This morning, she had woken up as Theresa Hastings, engaged to be married to Marcus Whitley. Now she was Theresa Jamison, wife of a rancher she barely knew. Her entire life had changed in a matter of hours. Part of her wanted to cry, to mourn for the life she had lost, for the man she had thought Marcus was. But another part of her, a part that was growing stronger, felt something else. Relief, perhaps, or possibility. The truth was, she had never felt for Marcus what she thought she should feel for the man she was going to marry. She had loved him in a comfortable, familiar way, but there had never been any real passion, any deep connection. She had convinced herself that was normal, that storybook romance was just that, a story. Now she was married to a man who had admired her from afar, who had stepped up to save her from humiliation, who promised to be patient and kind. It was not the beginning she had imagined, but perhaps it was the beginning she needed. The next morning, Theresa woke to sunlight streaming through the windows. The storm had passed, leaving behind a world transformed by snow. Everything glittered white and pristine under a brilliant blue sky. She dressed quickly in her wedding gown, since she had no other clothes, and went downstairs. The smell of coffee and bacon greeted her. In the kitchen, she found Ethan at the stove, cooking breakfast with the same competent efficiency he brought to everything else. "Good morning," he said, glancing over his shoulder at her. "I hope you slept well." "I did, actually," Theresa replied, somewhat surprised to realize it was true. "Better than I expected." "I am glad," Ethan said. "Sit down, breakfast is almost ready." Over eggs and bacon and fresh biscuits, Ethan outlined the plan for the day. "I need to ride out and check on the herd, make sure they all weathered the storm all right. But first, I want to go into town and collect your belongings from your parents' house. Would you like to come with me, or would you prefer to stay here and rest?" "I will come," Theresa decided. She wanted to see her mother, to reassure her that everything was all right. They took the wagon into Alamosa, the horses picking their way carefully through the snow-covered roads. The town was quiet under its blanket of white, smoke rising from chimneys into the cold, clear air. When they arrived at the Hastings house, Theresa's mother rushed out to greet them, pulling Theresa into a fierce embrace. "I barely slept last night, worrying about you," Margaret Hastings said. "Are you all right, darling? Truly all right?" "I am fine, Mother," Theresa assured her. "Ethan has been nothing but kind and respectful." Margaret looked over at Ethan, who was standing a polite distance away. "Thank you," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Thank you for what you did yesterday. I know it must seem strange, but you saved my daughter from terrible humiliation." "No thanks are necessary, Mrs. Hastings," Ethan replied. "I am honored to have Theresa as my wife." They went inside, where Theresa's father joined them. Over coffee, they discussed practical matters. Theresa's belongings were packed up: her clothes, her books, her few pieces of jewelry, the small items that made up her personal possessions. It did not take long. The Hastings family had already begun selling off their finer things to pay debts. As they were loading the last trunk into the wagon, Marcus Whitley's father, Robert Whitley, appeared on the street. He strode toward them, his face red with anger. "You," he said, pointing at Ethan. "You made a mockery of my son yesterday, made him look like a fool in front of the entire town." Ethan turned to face the older man, his expression calm. "With respect, Mr. Whitley, your son made himself look like a fool. I merely offered an alternative when he abandoned his bride at the altar." "You had no right," Robert sputtered. "Marcus had good reason to call off that wedding. The Hastings family is bankrupt. He would have been tying himself to their debts." "Then he should not have proposed marriage in the first place," Ethan said evenly. "A man's word should mean something. Or does Marcus only keep his promises when it is financially convenient?" Robert's face turned an even deeper shade of red. "How dare you? My son is a respectable banker. You are nothing but a dirt farmer with delusions of grandeur." "I am a rancher," Ethan corrected, his voice still calm but with an edge of steel now. "And I am a man who keeps his word." "That is more than I can say for your son." "You will regret this," Robert threatened. "My family has influence in this town. We can make things very difficult for you." "I am sure you can try," Ethan replied. "But I own my land outright, Mr. Whitley. I owe no debts to any bank. So unless you plan to try something illegal, I suggest you go home and explain to your son that actions have consequences." Robert Whitley looked like he wanted to say more, but Thomas Hastings stepped forward. "That is enough, Robert. Your son hurt my daughter deeply yesterday." Ethan Jamison showed more honor in 5 minutes than Marcus showed in a year of courtship. "Now please leave my property." For a moment, it looked like Robert might argue further, but then he spun on his heel and stalked away, his boots crunching in the snow. "I am sorry about that," Thomas said to Ethan. "No apology necessary," Ethan replied. "Though I imagine that will not be the end of it. The Whitleys are not the type to let a perceived slight go unavenged." "Will they cause you trouble?" Theresa asked, worried. Ethan shrugged. "They might try. But as I said, I am financially independent. There is not much they can do to hurt me, and I am not afraid of social ostracism. I have never been much for society anyway." They finished loading the wagon and said their goodbyes. Margaret made Theresa promise to visit again soon, and Thomas shook Ethan's hand with genuine gratitude. As they drove back to the ranch, Theresa found herself thinking about what Ethan had said to Robert Whitley. He had defended her and her family without hesitation, had stood up to a man with influence and power in the community. Marcus had never been that strong, she realized now. He had always been concerned with appearances, with what people thought, with maintaining his family's social standing. The difference between the two men was stark, and it was becoming increasingly clear to Theresa that she had made the right choice in accepting Ethan's proposal, even if it had not felt like a choice at the time. The following weeks fell into a rhythm. Ethan spent his days working the ranch, riding out to check the cattle, mending fences, overseeing his ranch hands. Theresa settled into her new role as mistress of the household. She reorganized the kitchen to her liking, hung curtains she sewed from fabric. Ethan bought her in town, planted herbs in pots on the windowsills even though it was winter. Slowly, she began to make the house a home. Mrs. Chen came on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays, and Theresa found her to be a treasure trove of knowledge about running a ranch household. The older woman taught her how to cook for working men, how to preserve food, how to manage supplies for when snow made trips to town impossible. Rosa Herrera, Miguel's wife, also visited frequently, and Theresa found a friend in the warm-hearted woman. In the evenings, Ethan and Theresa would eat dinner together, then spend time in the parlor. Sometimes they read, Ethan in his chair with a book on cattle breeding, Theresa on the sofa with a novel. Sometimes they talked about the ranch, or about their pasts, or about current events from the newspapers Ethan brought from town. The conversation was easy, natural, and Theresa found herself looking forward to these quiet evenings. Ethan remained true to his word about giving her space. He never pressed her for more than she was willing to give. But Theresa was beginning to notice things about him that appealed to her. The way his eyes crinkled when he smiled, which he did more often now. The strength in his hands, capable yet gentle. The sound of his laugh, rare but genuine. The way he always seemed to know when she needed support and when she needed independence. One evening, about a month after their wedding, they were sitting together by the fire when Theresa finally asked the question that had been on her mind. "Ethan, why did you never marry before? You are a good man, successful, certainly not unattractive." Surely there were women who would have been interested. Ethan looked up from his book, surprised by the question. "I suppose there might have been," he said slowly, "but I was never interested in marrying just for the sake of being married. I wanted to find someone I could truly respect, someone I could build a life with, someone who would be a partner, not just a wife in name only." "And you think I am that person?" Theresa asked softly. "I am beginning to hope so," Ethan replied, his gaze steady on hers. You are stronger than you think, Theresa. You have adapted to ranch life without complaint. You have made this house a home. You treat my ranch hands with respect and kindness. You have every reason to be bitter about how your life changed, but instead, you have faced it with grace and determination. Yes, I think you are that person. Theresa felt warmth spread through her chest. You see me very differently than Marcus did. Marcus was a fool, Ethan said simply. He saw only your father's money and your pretty face. He never took the time to see who you actually are. And who am I? Theresa asked, genuinely curious about his answer. Ethan set his book aside and leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, his eyes intent on her face. You are intelligent and adaptable. You are kind but not weak. You have a spine of steel beneath your gentle manner. You are loyal to those you love. You do not give up when things get hard. You are exactly the kind of woman I have always hoped to find. Theresa felt her breath catch. No one had ever spoken to her that way before, with such clear-eyed admiration. I am not sure I am all those things, she whispered. You are, Ethan insisted. You just have not had anyone to tell you so before. That night, lying in her bed, Theresa admitted to herself what she had been trying to deny. She was falling in love with her husband. It was not the giddy, superficial feeling she had mistaken for love with Marcus. This was deeper, built on respect and admiration and the quiet intimacy of shared daily life. She was falling in love with Ethan Jamison, and the realization both thrilled and terrified her. As winter began to loosen its grip and early spring arrived in the San Luis Valley, Theresa and Ethan's relationship continued to deepen. They worked together more, Theresa sometimes riding out with him to check on the cattle, learning about the ranch operations. She proved to have a good head for numbers and began helping him with his account books. He valued her opinions and consulted her on decisions about the ranch. One evening in late March, they were standing on the porch together, watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of pink and gold. The air was still cool, but there was a promise of warmth to come. Theresa stood close to Ethan, close enough that their shoulders brushed. Theresa, Ethan said quietly, not looking at her but at the mountains. I want you to know that these past months have been the happiest of my life. Having you here, building this life together, it means more to me than I can properly express. I feel the same way, Theresa replied, her heart beating faster. When you married me, I did not think I could ever feel for you what a wife should feel for her husband, but I was wrong. I have come to care for you deeply, Ethan, more than care for you if I am honest. Ethan turned to look at her then, hope blazing in his eyes. What are you saying? I am saying that I love you, Theresa said, the words coming out in a rush now that she had started. I do not know exactly when it happened. Maybe it was gradual, or maybe it was that first day when you stepped up to take those vows. But I love you, Ethan Jamison. Truly and completely. Ethan's face transformed, joy lighting his features in a way she had never seen before. Theresa, he breathed, reaching up to cup her face in his hands. I have loved you since before I even knew your name. These months getting to know you, seeing you every day, it has only made me love you more. Then why did we not talk about this sooner? Theresa asked, laughing a little through sudden tears. Because I did not want to rush you, Ethan said. I wanted you to come to your feelings in your own time without pressure from me. You are an extraordinarily patient man, Theresa said. Only when it comes to things that matter, Ethan replied. Then he leaned down and kissed her, and this time it was not the brief, chaste kiss from their wedding day. This was a real kiss, deep and passionate, full of months of restrained desire and newly declared love. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Ethan rested his forehead against hers. I do not want to sleep in separate rooms anymore, he admitted. I want to be a real husband to you, Theresa, if you are ready for that. "I am ready," Theresa whispered. "I have been ready for a while now. I was just waiting for the right moment to tell you." That night, their marriage became complete in every sense. Ethan was gentle and patient, making sure Theresa felt comfortable and cherished. And when they finally came together, it was with a tenderness and passion that left Theresa understanding, for the first time, what all the fuss about physical love was supposed to be about. Afterward, lying in Ethan's arms in his bed, their bed now, she felt complete in a way she never had before. "I love you," Ethan murmured into her hair. "I will love you until the day I die, Theresa Jamison." "And I love you," Theresa replied, pressing a kiss to his chest. "Thank you for being brave enough to step forward that day. Thank you for giving me the chance to find real love." "Thank you for accepting me," Ethan replied, "for seeing past the abrupt circumstances and giving us a chance." As spring progressed into summer, their happiness only grew. The ranch prospered under their joint management. Theresa's parents visited often, and Thomas Hastings found himself consulting with Ethan on business matters, the younger man's sound judgment proving valuable. The friendship between the two families deepened. In town, opinions about the unusual marriage gradually shifted. At first, there had been plenty of gossip and speculation. But as people saw how well Ethan and Theresa worked together, how clearly they cared for each other, the talk changed. They became known as a love match, one of those rare marriages that was based on genuine affection rather than social convenience. The Whitley family continued to be cold, but their influence was not as strong as they had believed. Marcus eventually left Alamosa, taking a position at a bank in Denver, unable to face the reminder of his cowardice every time he saw Ethan and Theresa together. His parents followed a year later, selling their house and moving to Colorado Springs. In the fall of 1885, Theresa discovered she was pregnant. Ethan was overjoyed, immediately becoming protective and solicitous, though Theresa laughed at his worrying and continued to work around the house as usual. "I am having a baby, not dying of consumption," she told him when he tried to stop her from hanging laundry. "Women have been doing this since the beginning of time." "Not my woman," Ethan replied, taking the laundry basket from her. "Not when I am here to help." Their son was born in May of 1886, during a thunderstorm that rattled the windows and drummed on the roof. Dr. Henderson from town attended the birth, along with Rosa Herrera and Mrs. Chen. Ethan paced in the parlor below, wearing a path in the rug until Miguel finally convinced him to come out to the barn and do something useful. When Dr. Henderson finally came down to tell him he had a son, Ethan raced up the stairs 3 at a time. He found Theresa propped up in bed, tired but glowing, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in blankets. She looked up at him with tears of joy streaming down her face. "Meet your son," she said softly. Ethan approached the bed reverently, looking down at the tiny red face peeking out from the blankets. The baby had a shock of dark hair and was making little fussing noises. "He is perfect," Ethan whispered, his own eyes damp. "You are amazing. I love you so much." "I love you too," Theresa replied. "Do you want to hold him?" Ethan carefully took his son, cradling the infant against his broad chest with surprising gentleness. "Hello, little one," he murmured. "I am your papa, and I promise you I will always be here for you. I will never walk away, never abandon you, never let you down. What should we name him?" Theresa asked. They had discussed names but had not settled on anything definitive. Now, looking at her husband holding their son with such love and devotion, Theresa knew exactly what she wanted to call him. "Edward," she said, "after your father." "Edward Thomas Jamison, to include my father as well." Ethan looked up at her, surprised and clearly moved. "Are you certain? I know my father and I were not particularly close, but you respected him, Theresa said, and you became the man you are partly because of him. That deserves to be honored. Edward Thomas Jamison, Ethan repeated, testing the name. He looked down at his son. What do you think, Eddie? Do you like your name? The baby yawned, a tiny sound that made both parents laugh. They spent the rest of the afternoon in the bedroom, the three of them cocooned together, learning the shape of their new family. The years that followed were good ones. Eddie grew into a sturdy, cheerful toddler who loved following his father around the ranch. In 1888, they had a daughter whom they named Margaret Rose after both grandmothers. 2 years later, another son arrived whom they called James. The ranch continued to prosper. Ethan's hard work and smart management, combined with Theresa's organizational skills and attention to detail, made Jamison Ranch one of the most successful in the valley. They expanded their land holdings, increased their herd, and became well respected in the community. Theresa's parents remained close, her father eventually finding work managing a mercantile in town. The shame of his failed investment faded with time, and he took pride in his daughter's success and in the grandchildren who visited regularly. Miguel and Rosa became like family, their children growing up alongside the Jamison children. Jack and Tom Henderson married local girls and built houses on ranch property, becoming permanent fixtures. Mrs. Chen continued to come 3 times a week until she was too elderly, at which point Theresa insisted she retire comfortably, the Jamisons providing her a small stipend in gratitude for her years of service. One summer evening in 1895, Ethan and Theresa sat on their porch swing, watching their children play in the yard. Eddie, now 9, was teaching 6-year-old Margaret how to throw a rope. 5-year-old James was chasing chickens, laughing gleefully as they scattered before him. "Do you ever think about that day?" Ethan asked, his arm around Theresa's shoulders. "The day we got married." "Sometimes," Theresa admitted, leaning into his warmth. "It feels like a lifetime ago now." "It was the best day of my life," Ethan said, "even with all the drama and uncertainty. Because it gave me you." "Marcus did me a favor, really," Theresa mused. "If he had not walked away, I would never have discovered what real love feels like. I would never have had this life, these children. I would never have known you." "Do you ever wonder what happened to him?" Ethan asked. "Not really," Theresa said honestly. "I heard he married some banker's daughter in Denver. I hope he is happy, but I do not think about him much. That whole chapter of my life feels like it happened to someone else." "You were someone else in a way," Ethan observed. "You were a girl trying to fit herself into the life she thought she was supposed to want. Now you are a woman who knows exactly who she is and what she wants." "And what I want is this," Theresa said, gesturing to encompass the ranch, the children, Ethan himself. "This life we have built together. This family, this love. You have it," Ethan said, pressing a kiss to her temple. "You have it forever, Theresa. That is one promise I will never break." "I know," Theresa replied, tilting her head up to kiss him properly. "That is what makes all the difference." As the sun set over the Sangre de Cristo Mountains, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples, the Jamison family gathered together on the porch. Eddie and Margaret came running up, breathless and laughing, while James toddled behind them. They all squeezed onto the porch swing and the steps, a tangle of arms and legs and love. This was what Theresa had gained from that snowy day in December when her world had fallen apart. Not just a husband, though Ethan was more than she could have ever hoped for. Not just a home, though the ranch had become dearer to her than any mansion in town could have been. She had gained a real family, built on genuine love and respect and partnership. She had gained everything that truly mattered. Winters came and went in the San Luis Valley. The children grew, Eddie eventually took over more of the ranch operations, showing his father's aptitude for the work. Margaret surprised everyone by developing a passion for horses and becoming an accomplished rider and trainer. James, the baby, turned out to have a head for numbers and began handling the ranch's financial records while still in his teens. Theresa's parents lived long enough to see all their grandchildren grown, passing peacefully in their sleep within months of each other in 1902. They died knowing their daughter was happy, secure, and deeply loved. In 1904, on a December day exactly 20 years after their wedding, Ethan and Theresa stood in the same small church in Alamosa. This time, they were renewing their vows, surrounded by their children, grandchildren, and friends. Reverend Patterson had long since passed, replaced by a younger minister who had heard the story of their unusual wedding and was honored to conduct the ceremony. 20 years ago, Ethan said, holding both of Theresa's hands in his, I stood in this church and made promises to you without really knowing if you would ever come to love me. But I was willing to take that chance, because even then I knew you were worth it. And I stood here, Theresa replied, tears in her eyes, thinking my life was over, not knowing that it was actually just beginning. You saved me that day, Ethan, not just from humiliation but from a life without real love. We saved each other, Ethan corrected gently. You gave me purpose beyond just building a successful ranch. You gave me a reason to come home every night, a partner to share my life with, a love I never thought I would find. The minister led them through the vows again, the same words they had spoken 2 decades before, but this time with full understanding of what they meant. When Ethan kissed Theresa at the end, their children applauded and whistled, causing both parents to laugh even as they embraced. The celebration afterward was held at the ranch, with neighbors and friends filling the house and spilling out into the yard despite the December cold. There was music and dancing and more food than could possibly be eaten. At one point, Eddie raised a toast to his parents. To my mother and father, he said, his voice carrying across the crowd, who proved that sometimes the best things in life come from the most unexpected places, who showed us all what real love and commitment look like, and who built something lasting and true out of what started as an act of desperation and kindness. Everyone raised their glasses, and Ethan pulled Theresa close, kissing her soundly to the cheers of the assembled guests. Later, when the party had wound down and most of the guests had departed, Ethan and Theresa found themselves alone in the parlor, the same room where they had spent so many quiet evenings together over the years. 20 years, Theresa mused, snuggled against Ethan's side on the sofa. It has gone so fast. The best years of my life, Ethan said, and I am looking forward to many more. We are getting older, Theresa pointed out. I will be 41 next month. You are 47. We are not young anymore. So, Ethan challenged, we still have plenty of years ahead of us. Years to watch our children build their own lives. Years to meet more grandchildren. Years to sit on this sofa together and remember everything we have lived through. When you put it that way, Theresa said, smiling, it sounds wonderful. It will be, Ethan promised. Because I will be with you and you will be with me. That is all that matters. They sat together in comfortable silence, watching the fire burn low in the fireplace. Outside, snow began to fall again just as it had on their wedding day. But this time, there was no fear, no uncertainty. Only the deep contentment that comes from a life well lived and a love well earned. The years continued to unfold. Eddie married a schoolteacher from Denver and brought her home to the ranch. Margaret eventually married a horse breeder from Santa Fe and moved to New Mexico, though she visited often. James surprised everyone by falling in love with Rosa and Miguel's youngest daughter, Anna, creating yet another bond between the two families. Ethan and Theresa became beloved grandparents, their house always open to children and grandchildren. They remained active in the ranch operations well into their 60s, though they gradually handed more responsibility to Eddie and James. In 1915, on a warm summer evening, Ethan suffered a heart attack while working in the barn. He died in Theresa's arms, his last words a whispered "I love you" that she carried in her heart forever after. Theresa mourned deeply, but she was sustained by her children and grandchildren, by the life she and Ethan had built together, by the love that could never truly die. She lived for another 12 years, remaining sharp and active until the end. She passed away peacefully in her sleep in 1927, at the age of 63. She was buried next to Ethan in the Alamosa cemetery, under a simple stone that read Ethan Jamison, 1857, 1915 Theresa Jamison, 1864-1927. Together forever the ranch remained in the family, passed down through generations. The story of how Ethan and Theresa met, how he stepped forward to claim a bride who was being abandoned at the altar, became family legend. It was told to children and grandchildren, a reminder that sometimes love comes from the most unexpected places, and that courage and kindness can change the course of a life. The small church in Alamosa where they married still stands, though it has been renovated and expanded over the years. Sometimes, in the winter when snow falls thick and heavy, people say they can feel something special in the air there. Some echo of the day when a cowboy's bold offer and a woman's brave acceptance created a love story that would endure for generations. And in the ranch house that Ethan built and Theresa made a home, the parlor sofa still sits in its place of honor. The current generation of Jamisons, great-great-grandchildren of Ethan and Theresa, have preserved it carefully. They know the story of all the evenings their ancestors spent there, building a life and a love one quiet moment at a time. Because that is what Ethan and Theresa's story truly was about. Not the dramatic moment at the altar, though that made for good telling. The real story was in all the days and nights that followed. The steady accumulation of shared meals and conversations and challenges met together. The gradual deepening of respect into affection into passionate love. The commitment to show up for each other, day after day, year after year. In that small wooden church in December of 1884, when Marcus Whitley walked away and Ethan Jamison stepped forward, more than just a wedding ceremony was happening. A foundation was being laid for something rare and precious. A partnership, a true marriage. A love that would weather every storm and grow stronger with each passing season. And if Marcus Whitley, wherever he ended up, ever thought about the woman he abandoned, he must have realized what he had lost. Not her father's money, which had been his only real concern, but the chance to know a woman of strength and grace, to build something real and lasting, to experience the kind of love that most people only dream about. He walked away from Theresa Hastings that snowy day. Ethan Jamison walked toward her, and that made all the difference. The end.